All right, good morning, everyone. This is Hoover. Snuck downstairs while my kids are still sleeping, hoping to give you a lesson on mitosis and meiosis. So we already talked about mitosis, so I'm going to try to focus on meiosis. But remember, we learned mitosis. That's the asexual one. It makes body cells. Whereas meiosis is the sexual one that makes sex cells. So you might be thinking like, oh, we only do meiosis because humans do sexual reproduction, and we do, but we also do mitosis all the time, every time we want to make a new body cell. So every time we need a new brain cell or a new skin cell or a new blood cell, we do the asexual one, okay? So we use it for growth. Like every time a child gets bigger, that's by mitosis, and repair, like replacing our dead skin cells. So because we are making new body cells, we do want them to have the full number of chromosomes. Whereas in meiosis, when you're making sex cells, you're making a sperm and an egg, you really want them to have only half the chromosome number. So I always find that kind of easy to remember. Because you'd only want your sex cells to have half the chromosome number because they're going to get together and make the full number when fertilization occurs. And then this is exact copies. So again, I find this a little bit easier to remember because there's only one parent. So you're going to get exact copies. There's no other parent adding their genetic information. And when you're making a new skin cell, you want it to be an exact copy, or a new blood cell, you want it to be an exact copy. Whereas when this one is not identical, so when you're making a baby, think you and your siblings are not exactly identical. And that leads us to this thing that they love for you to know. Meiosis leads to genetic variation. So because there's sexual reproduction and there's two parents and they're different, they're not identical, you're going to end up with some genetic variation. And that's the whole reason that kind of humans and other organisms are able to evolve. There's new ones of us all the time, and sometimes we get new and improved ones, and that's how we're able to like change over time, because we have new things all the time. And we'll learn about that in evolution. But because that is such a big part of how we change over time, that is a big concept. So again, mitosis, asexual, meiosis, sexual. Mitosis, we use it all the time to make body cells. Meiosis, we use it just to make sex cells. And remember, we said like you use mitosis to make mitoses, like that's a body cell, your toes. Meiosis makes me. It's what makes me unique. This has the full number of chromosomes, right? Because you want your new skin cells and your blood cells to have the right number. This has half the number of chromosomes because you want your new, you want a sperm and egg to have half the number of chromosomes so that when they get together to make a baby, that baby has the correct number. So that'd be like these have 23 and the sperm has 23 and the egg has 23. So when they get together to make a human, they get 46. And again, this is identical. They harp on this. There's so many questions on this. And this is not identical, and it gives us genetic variation. All right, just going to pause this for a second. Oh, no, I can't. Okay, so I'm going to make another video where I talk about the process of meiosis. Okay, so here's the actual process of meiosis and mitosis, and where they kind of go differently to get those different results. So in the end, meiosis should end up with cells that have half the genetic material. So you're like, okay, well, what do I do to get half the genetic material? So my first thought was, oh, okay, so instead of, you take that 46 chromosomes, and instead of doing that replication, you just go ahead and split them and you get 23. So I thought, oh, just leave the replication out of it. But that is not what happens. The DNA does replicate just like the beginning of mitosis. So I'm going to show you what happens and where it does go differently. So remember, in mitosis, before the DNA can start, the chromosomes can start splitting, we go in and we duplicate them or replicate them. Okay, remember there was like pink ones or blue ones, and the different colors kind of represent that some came from your dad and some came from your mom. So we went through and we replicated them, right? We put the two, what was it called, pipe cleaners together to show DNA replication. So we said, all right, well, we're going to replicate it first so that when we split, we end up with the right number. So that's what they did. In mitosis, they lined up like this. Remember, in the middle, metaphase, middle, and then anaphase, they got pulled apart. Remember, the spindle fibers attached, and it kind of pulled them away from each other. And in the end, you ended up with what you started with, except you had two new cells. So in the end, you had two new cells that were exactly like the two original cells, all right, by replicating, lining up, and splitting, and that's it. Meiosis, you are going to replicate. So it's like, okay, well, if you split, then you're going to end up with this. So what we're going to do is meiosis is going to split 2 times, right? Because if you had, say you had like 46 chromosomes, if you replicate and you temporarily kind of double that to 98, then if you split, each one ends up with 46, 46. That's not what I'm going for. So I'm going to have those each split again so that I have 23, 23, 23, 23. All right, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. And you don't have to know like every step of the process. I'm just kind of showing you so you understand. But they're lining up. So the next step is metaphase, and they're going to line up. And I'll show you how they line up. Like that. And you might notice that it looks a little different, the lining up. Instead of lining up single file, they are lined up in pairs. And that's where meiosis kind of goes different. And then, so they would separate, like this whole thing would come over here, this whole thing would come over here, this whole piece comes over here, this whole piece comes over here. All right. So you end up with these two kind of, not new cells, I guess temporarily new cells that are not the same as the original. You got like a pink one over here and a blue one over here. And so then what happens next is in these two new cells, these are now going to line up single file. Better red. Okay. So now they'll line up single file, and we're going to call this meiosis 2 because they're going to split. And now it's going to be just like mitosis, where now the spindle fibers attach, and this chromosome is going to get like ripped apart. Spindle fibers attached, gets ripped apart, and you have a second division, and you're now going to end up with this new cell, this new cell, this new cell, and this new cell. Let me pause this. Okay, so that was a lot I just told you. Let me tell you the really important things about it. If you didn't catch every bit of it, that's okay. But the main point is that in mitosis, they kind of line up single file like we learned, and they go their separate ways. Okay, so like this half, they get ripped apart, goes over here, and this half gets ripped apart and goes over here. In meiosis, the first time they divide, because they divide twice, they line up in these pairs where these line up single file. And these pairs lead to two major things that you need to know, okay? So what can happen when you're kind of lining up in pairs is that sometimes what's called crossing over occurs. And crossing over is kind of exactly how it sounds. So it's like when this red one is next to this blue one, maybe a little bit, they cross over, okay? And what happens is they kind of like, this right here, they kind of swap some genetic information, and it ends up being like this, where the red one now kind of has a little bit of the blue genes in it, and the blue one now has a little bit of the red. Okay, so they end up like swapping a little genetic information. And we already said meiosis is where you get variation because you have two parents. Now that we're like crisscrossing and swapping DNA, now you're really getting variation. Okay, so this is like extra variation. So this is one of the only things you really have to know about meiosis is this concept called crossing over. Okay, and you need to know that crossing over just leads to further genetic variation. So again, we said meiosis is the one that makes me, it makes me unique, and it's because there's two parents, so it's not exact copies, but it's also because you have this thing called crossing over, where the DNA really gets like even more scrambled, and you get even new combinations, and that crossing over leads to further genetic variation. All right, so the last important thing you need to know about meiosis is, again, how they line up in pairs leads to another interesting thing, that when they are supposed to split, so remember they split, these guys they split kind of as a whole, like the blue goes over here and the reds go over here, and they split in their whole X's. And then the next time they're going to line up single file, and they're going to split just like these guys did into like singles. But anyways, when they line up like this and they are supposed to split, and there's that little bit of crossing over, sometimes these little guys, like they kind of like get stuck together. Like just like we showed the crossing over, like they kind of like intertwine. So when you put those matching pairs, which we do call homologous pairs, I don't think you'd have to know that. When you put those pairs next to each other, sometimes they kind of get stuck, and they're supposed to come apart. They're supposed to do what we call disjunction. You dis the junction. So a junction in a road is where like roads come together. So disjunction is when you like break the coming together. So this coming apart is called disjunction. And what can happen is sometimes they stick together and they don't come apart, and it's called non-disjunction. So it's kind of like a tricky word. So what would happen, instead of blue going this way and the red going this way, what would happen is the blue and the red maybe go over here, okay? And what you end up with is one cell that has like 2 times the genetic information that it's supposed to, and one cell that has like missing a chromosome. So that is where genetic disease can come from. And that is where like Down syndrome, trisomy 21 comes from. So say this was the 21st chromosome. Now this particular cell has an extra 21st chromosome. When it gets together with the mom cell that has its own 21st chromosome, now there are 3 21st chromosomes. Say this is a dad. The dad, one of its sperm cells has twice as many. It has 2 21st chromosomes. It's only supposed to have 1. Gets together with the mom, and now there's 3 21st chromosomes. All right, what happens to this one over here that's missing a chromosome? That can also be a genetic disorder where you don't have enough chromosomes. There's certain genetic disorders that are involved missing one. Some of these genetic disorders, like we know trisomy 21, well, what if you have trisomy 12? What if you have a different one? So there are some rare other genetic disorders where you have extra chromosomes. There's if you have an extra Y chromosome, that's a disease. All right, so just to conclude what you really have to know about mitosis and meiosis, after I went through all the recent years of Regents questions, is that mitosis is the asexual one, and meiosis is the sexual one. Mitosis makes body cells, so it could be an amoeba's body, but it could also be your body. And meiosis only makes sex cells. So all your 37 trillion body cells are made by mitosis, and only your sex cells are made by meiosis, and that's sperm and egg. Mitosis, since it's your body cells, you want them to have the full 46 number of chromosomes. Meiosis, you want them to have the half number of chromosomes, because that sperm and egg are going to get together to make the 46. Mitosis is only one parent, and it's going to make identical copies, where meiosis is not identical. And because there are 2 parents, it's going to be not identical. Plus, that crossing over is going to make it even more not identical. So this is where you're going to get all your genetic variation from. And I did also notice in the Regents questions that they didn't really say mitosis and meiosis as much. They kind of called it like sexual and asexual. So remembering asexual is the one that makes body cells full 46 identical copies. Sexual is the one that makes sex cells, obviously, with the half number that gives us our genetic variation. So that is it. I hope you can, oh, wait, there's one more thing. Okay, so this question comes up all the time. They show you a picture of, this is like one fertilized egg, a zygote, and it just keeps splitting and splitting and splitting and dividing until it eventually grows into a baby. And they always ask if this is mitosis or meiosis. So they do use those words quite a bit. And people think like, oh, a baby, sexual reproduction, that's meiosis. Okay. Meiosis is what made the sperm in an egg that made this baby. But as soon as it started growing, see, it's hard, it's all reversed. As soon as it started growing, this is all the growing of the baby. That is mitosis. Every time you make a new identical cell, that is mitosis. That is not meiosis. So I'll just say that again. This picture is mitosis. The process that made the sperm and egg, that was meiosis. But this growing of the zygote into a baby, that's mitosis. So we are going to put this picture on the mitosis side of our board. Okay, so that's it. Please let me know if you have any questions and use this to help you answer the Castle learning questions. Bye.